Ramsey Campbell is one of the world's most influential and iconic writers of modern horror literature. He's been writing for over 50 years and is the author of such great classic horror novels like The Midnight Sun, Ancient Images, The Parasite, The Overnight, and most recently, 13 Days by Sunset Beach. He also has many collections of short stories such as Dark Companions, Alone with the Horrors, Ghosts and Grisly Things, and Holes for Faces. He's also a critic and essayist, a award-winning author of such awards as the International Horror Guild Award, the British Fantasy Award, and the World Fantasy Award. I mean, I could go on and on with this guy's list of accomplishments. And so we're very, very proud to have you on the show. Thank you, Ramsey, for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure, my pleasure.
So, let me start off by telling you how Joe, actually, he sent me an email saying, because he's our sponsor, right? He was like, we have this list of authors on this anthology that we've got. Do you want to talk to any of them for your show? And I was like, well, is Ramsey Campbell too far of a stretch? And he's like, no, I don't think so. I'll shoot him an email and see what he says. And lo and behold, here you are. I mean, 4 days ago, this interview didn't exist, but here we are today. It's
4 days ago, I didn't exist, man.
It's a crazy world we live in today. Like, if this were 10 years ago even, it might have taken a lot longer for this to come to fruition.
Yeah, no, technology is... well, we may say a lot against it, but, I'm pretty glad we've got it all the same.
Yeah, me too. It makes things, easier and faster in some parts.
Sure.
And Joe's been very good to us, too.
Oh, yeah, Joe is an awesome guy. One thing I really admire about you, Ramsey, is your love of the horror genre and the fact that you continuously stand up for it. I want to personally thank you for that.
My pleasure.
On the landing page of your website, you mentioned that you were at a panel at a conference that appeared to be celebrating the death of horror and to celebrate the birth of cross genre. Is this a general feeling you feel still prevalent in the world today?
Oh, I think basically, the new thing comes along every so often, whatever new thing it might be, and it's seen as sweeping away the old guard or the old traditions. To be fair, that cross-genre thing wasn't trying to do that. I think it was trying to, to marry several different traditions and see what came out. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. I mean, you actually look back a bit further. And someone like Lovecraft, I mean, he unites the British and American traditions, I think. On the one hand, he's coming out of Edgar Allan Poe and Ambrose Bierce. But at the same time, he's coming out of Arthur Machen and Algernon Blackwood. And to a certain extent, I think even M.R. James. And then Fritz Leiber does the same thing, a little bit later on. So you really can't get a lot of strength out of uniting different traditions. And equally, I've got to say that when I started seriously writing like myself rather than simply imitating favorite writers, I was bringing a lot of stuff from outside the field, writers whose work I greatly admired who were not as identified with horror fiction, say Graham Greene or Nabokov, both of whom I discovered in my mid-teens. And once I'd done my Lovecraft imitation book, that first book about The Inhabitant of the Lake, I really wanted to push things a little bit further and bring in the stuff that I didn't think was in the field. I'm sure it was there, but it was probably necessary for me to ignore other people who'd already done it, like, say Robert Aikman, in order to pretend to myself that I was doing something new so that I could do it at all.
Yeah. One reason why I was asking, because I had a similar experience in 2007 at the World Horror Convention. I believe you were there. I met you there briefly.
Yes,
and I think I got you to sign my books.
I hope I did them all. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and there is a lot of that same feeling there, though. That says a lot of authors there were saying, "Let's kill the genre marketplace in the bookstores and just have the books in general fiction."
Yes, well, I suppose, I'm in two minds about that one because, I grew up before there was a horror section in the library or in the bookshop,
Yeah.
so I had to go and search them out. And believe me, I was pretty good at doing that, So by the time I was like 9, 10, or probably even earlier than that, 6, 7 years old, I'd got all the books out from the public library that could in any way be identified as horror or science fiction, which I loved as well. And I think there's something to be said for having to search because you often stumble upon stuff you might not otherwise find. But at the same time, I do appreciate, that people like to find their particular favourite field in one place. And I'm really in two minds about it. I don't have a strong feeling either way.
Yeah. I want to go back just a little bit again to talk briefly of your influences. Your writing is very much a torch for the classic weird fiction of early 1900s. Is it fair to say that you were a big fan growing up of M.R. James and H.P. Lovecraft and Algernon Blackwood?
Gosh, yes, absolutely so. I mean, it's interesting. M.R. James, I found, very early on. I was certainly by the time I was like 11. I think I had his collected ghost stories, big fat edition of them. Lovecraft, I'd only come across sporadically in anthologies, lots of them by August Derleth or Groff Conklin, who was another 50s anthologist who often used Lovecraft in his science fiction books. And it wasn't until I was actually 14 years old that I found my very first complete collection of Lovecraft and nothing else, which was it was Cry Horror paperback. It used to be The Lurking Fear. Don Walheim actually edited it back in the late 40s originally. And, this was a huge revelation for me to have so much Lovecraft in end to end, basically just this intense experience. And actually I just sat and took a day off school. I pretended I was ill, because I wanted to read this book so much, So I just spent the entire day reading nothing but Lovecraft. By the time I'd finished that, I wanted to write like that. I'd finally found, a specific focus for what I wanted to do. Previous to which I'd been, putting bits of favourite authors together, like Frankenstein's monster in prose, and they didn't really fit together. But I finally now had something to concentrate my energies upon. But yes, Lovecraft, M.R. James, certainly Blackwood, certainly Arthur Machen. But we'll come back to him in a bit, I think, because he comes into the particular story that we'll be discussing later on.
Yeah.
But no, I've always loved it, and of course I nearly left out Poe, who was one of the very, very first I ever encountered. I got the Tales of Mystery and Imagination again before I was a teenager. So those hugely and basically there was very little. In the 50s, when I was reading up on encountering the field for the very first time, there wasn't much else other than the classics to find, particularly not in the public library. And it was only a little bit later on that I started collecting Weird Tales and the magazine, and discovering how much more there was out there.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Michael, about his influences?
Yeah. When you start talking about the marriage between science fiction and horror, I immediately start thinking about Ray Bradbury. Was he an influence on you at all?
He wasn't a direct influence, but he was an absolute huge favourite. I mean, I was reading Golden Apples, The Illustrated Man, Fahrenheit 451, of course, The Martian Chronicles, or The Silver Locust, which is the more poetic title, the one I'd prefer. Again, I was much younger than teenage when I read of all of those. But he was never that much of an influence on my style. But I think you could certainly argue he was an influence once I started to try and write, a more modern, contemporary, urban kind of a supernatural horror. As certainly was Fritz Leiber, who was, one of the great guiding lights for me. And so actually was Richard Matheson, I think. So there was that whole Californian group, Matheson and Bradbury, and to a lesser extent Charles Beaumont. All of whom, brought horror into the present day and into the urban environment, and of course hugely influenced Steve King as well.
Yeah, one thing I admire about your work is that you managed to keep One thing that I really like about the old weird stories from like 100 years ago, and that's the awe and wonder that a lot of these stories would present. Now, when you go to write a story, do you consciously force that, or does it just come naturally to you?
Well, I try not to force it. I mean, to be honest with you, the one novel where I do think I was trying to force it, although I know quite a lot of people like the book a bit, and that's Midnight Sun, but that was an absolute swine to write that novel, because I really was trying to do, cosmic terror with no physical horror or gruesomeness. I just genuinely wanted to do what I saw Blackwood doing in The Willows, for instance, Mackina's White People. And I think of all my novels, that's the one I came closest to abandoning, because I was having such a dreadful time with it. And it really genuinely felt like hacking bits out of a rock with a toothpick.
That's fun. That's funny that you say that, because when you first brought up that book, you said a lot of people really like that book, and I would say that's probably one of my favorites too.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So,
I mean, I'll be honest with you, and I think it's a kind of an honourable failure in terms of what I was trying to do. But, maybe I did a little bit of what I tried to do, even so. But, I've tried again since, to be honest. And I do think that, the highest aspiration of supernatural horror is exactly what you say, this sense of awe.
Yeah.
Which you certainly find in the people we've cited already, and Lovecraft certainly. I mean, I think The Colour Out of Space has it, possibly for me above all of his stories. But there are the Mountains of Madness and so forth as well.
Yeah.
And even if you don't quite, I mean, I'm still trying to scale those peaks that those authors represent. But maybe the effort is enough to produce a little bit that's worthy of them.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, you have accomplished that, but I like it that you don't think so, because you keep pushing yourself to do better. And
well, that's it, isn't it? You try and do better than you did last time. That's why you carry on writing.
Exactly. Yeah. So tell us, how did you come into contact with Joe Meinhardt from Crystal Lake Publishing?
Well, I believe Joe just got in touch with me, via email, via my website, as folk tend to do. And, he's a very genial chap, as you both know. And he gently persuaded me to be part of some anthologies of his, which I'm happy to be part of, believe me.
That's awesome, because you got a story that's coming out, I believe it's coming out tomorrow. With Gutted, with their new anthology, Gutted, beautiful horror stories, and your story is The Place of Revelation. Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes, I'll tell you. Oh, actually, it's a funny thing, because it's almost a bit of a coincidence. This, it's my attempt, in a way, to do Arthur Machen's The White People, which I think is quite possibly the greatest and most extraordinary tale of supernatural terror I've ever read. I mean, there are other candidates, but that's certainly very high indeed on my on my list. Yeah. And what I particularly like is that use of the naive voice, the girl telling these what seem to be innocent fairy tales and tales of legends, and yet underlying this dreadful kind of ominous darkness, is the not sense of of genuine horror, I think. I mean, there's that wonderful passage where she finds this rocky landscape where the rocks resemble, human beings and inhuman creatures, and she feels bound to try and imitate them and say the words that they suggest. I mean, I genuinely think that's one of the most, indefinably terrifying passages in my entire experience of literature. And The Place of Revelation was a sort of attempt to do that, the child or the young person's voice that again is light in tone, and yet is conveying these tremendous, images of supernatural dread, and that's really what I was up to in that tale. So it's very much a tribute to Arthur Machen. Now, I said there was a kind of a coincidence here, because well, I don't like to badmouth my own publisher, and I'm not really doing that. But if you look on the Tor.com site, you see that the two writers who regularly contribute discussions, usually about Lovecraft, today or most recently, at any rate, I don't know if it's quite today, are taking on The White People, and basically they kick it around quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think far more than that story deserves. And I hope I'm not going to offend anybody by saying this, but I think that story will be remembered long after their comments have been forgotten.
Yeah. Did you have a question about his story, Michael?
Actually, kind of a non sequitur, but you talk about Lovecraft, and I've certainly grown up and loved him all my life as well. I'm just wondering, you talk about how Lovecraft kind of merges the British and the American. Do you see a big difference between British and American horror?
Not so much that. I think it was just more the specific influences of those particular writers, So you've got Poe and Bierce on the one hand. I mean, what he doesn't take from is the European tradition, which again is a rather different one again. People like, whether they would necessarily be called horror by themselves, I don't know. But I would kind of bring in people like Kafka and E.T.A. Hoffman and the like, who certainly write very dark fantasy. Whether you call it horror is up to you. I would myself. But no, I don't know that I see that huge a difference between the two traditions, but I just think that it's very important that he took from those very individual writers and built something new out of them, having put them together.
Michael?
Excellent. I can definitely see that.
Okay, so is this are you going to be writing for Joe's or Crystal Lake Publishing in the future at all?
Well, it's possible. I don't know. He hasn't asked yet, but it wouldn't be at all surprising, I suspect. Yeah.
The one reason why I ask is because it would be exciting for one thing, and Joe's doing a ton of different things. He's always got stuff on the go, and it would be really exciting to see you to be a regular face around there. And so because he's like building a profile page for you on his website and all that, I was just wondering if there was like maybe some secret thing you could let us in on.
I see. No, I mean, not yet in terms of Joe. And actually, I've just realised I'm about senile as I am. I've probably forgotten that he did ask me about doing something more. Something probably more substantial. And the problem at the moment is I'm here. It's not quite a secret. I haven't widely disseminated it yet, but I'm actually now writing a supernatural horror trilogy. You know what? This is for PS Publishing here in Britain. I mean, the saintly Pete Crowther has been my publisher in Britain since the turn of the century, my most consistent publisher, and he gently but insistently suggested that I should do a trilogy for him, which is supernatural horror. Now, I've got to say, Jeff Vandermeer has beat me to it because he's done, the Annihilation trilogy, of course. But
yeah.
But no, don't worry about that. I think mine's different, and I'm sure we're equally different writers, and Jeff's extremely good, of course. But this is what I would call, a Britchester mythos trilogy, in the sense that it's drawing upon the kind of mythos that I invented in my own first book, The Inhabitant of the Lake, and I'm trying to develop some of those ideas in terms of the way I write now, really. And again, actually coming back to things we've already been talking about, but yes, I'm aiming very much more for awesomeness in this trilogy than perhaps in most of the stories in The Inhabitant. The first novel will be published in September in Britain. It's called The Searching Dead, and I'm now about halfway through the first draft of the second volume, which is called Born to the Dark. So awesome. There you go.
I really like that title.
Well, thank you.
It's a good one.
Yeah. So, excuse me. Sorry.
Good man.
So. On July 12th, you have a new novella coming out with Dark Regions Press titled
I do.
The Booking. Can you tell us what that one's about?
Yes, it's. I mean, this was Chris Morey of Dark Regions, in fact, who wanted me. He's building up this series of novellas of psychological horror and psychological terror, and which is something I do. Of course, I've done quite a bit. So he asked me to do one. I basically I dug around in my notebooks, which are numerous and full of ideas that I'll probably never have time to write, but then somebody else can have them. And I did find one that I'd wanted to do, without going into too much detail. It's about a guy who is, basically he's a student who is overqualified and can't find a job, but who finds that he can take up a position at a bookshop, basically putting the entire stock online, building it a website. However, the owner of the bookshop himself is, to put it mildly, quite strange and has various obsessions about the internet and about computer technology more generally. And things begin to get stranger as we go on, and I hope they get increasingly strange for about 25,000 words. Oh no, it's probably longer than that actually. But I had some fun with it. But those who read it find it stimulatingly dark, and I hope folk will generally.
Oh, I'm sure we will.
Can we mention one more imminent book? In fact,
yeah, for sure.
Okay, this is imminent in America. This isn't till August, but just to build Tor Books back up again, because Tom Doherty's a great friend of mine and a very good chap. He's been a hugely consistent publisher of my stuff in America, and he's got The Kind Folk, which is a novel about was published a couple of years ago in Britain, and this actually again is my attempt at it's not precisely meant as a novel-length tribute to Arthur Machen, but you'll most certainly see elements of Arthur Machen in it. And if I tell you that it's about someone who discovers that he has more of a connection with the kind folk of the title, or the fairies, but in the Macanesque sense, much more than the grim fairy tale sense, then you'll get a kind of an inkling of what the story's like. And it again, I hope it touches some notes of awe for the reader.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait for that. That's a lot coming out this summer. Do you have
Sure.
I'm so glad that you have a lot coming out for us. That's great news.
I never stop. As you can tell, you can't stop me. I mean, not till I'm nailed down. I'll probably still have a pen in there even then.
We don't want you to stop at all.
Absolutely.
So, is there one more question about other writers? Is there any young writers in today's weird and horror fiction that you're excited about?
Oh gosh, any number. You see, the problem with answering a question like this is that as soon as I finish answering, or as soon as we finish this interview, I'm going to think, oh no, Lord, and I forgot to mention. So there's always going to be somebody. But I'm just going to rattle off a few names for you then. I mean, Gary McMahon, Simon Bestwick, Kate Gardner, Thana Niveau, my old friend John Threlin Probert, who's doing his novella actually, Dead Shift. It's a great deal of fun. I've just recently read that. I mean, John has his roots in, I think it would be fair to say, in Amicus horror movies and the like. But let me see, in America, who have we got? I'm not thinking to make the distinction, but just thinking of more names: Linda, Rucker, Laird, Barron. Now Scott Nicolay has come up with some very striking. Have you read him?
I don't think so. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Look into him. Look at him. I mean, and then I thought, obviously enough. There's there are also, of course, the stalwarts who we must never forget. We still do have Steve King and Peter Straub and Dennis Etchison and the like. And they're doing remarkable work still. I mean,
yeah.
I actually found Revival, Steve King's novel, quite extraordinarily disturbing. Didn't quite give me a nightmare, but whenever I woke in the night, it was kind of in the dark there waiting for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned Amicus movies, so it sort of rains on something that Michael wanted to ask you in regards to movies.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of the same question that Jason just asked. I'm wondering if there's any movies are movies a big influence on you? And are there any new horror movies or movies in general that you're excited about too?
But I don't think they're much of an influence on me. I mean, there are little bits here and there scattered through that you might even spot. I mean, I didn't realize until quite recently that Carnival of Souls, for instance, was clearly an interest on an old story of mine called The Companion, which has a haunted fairground. And I mean, Carnival Souls actually contains a couple of images that I forgot I got from there when I wrote them. Incarnate, an old novel of mine, has a scene in which a second head turns up on somebody's shoulder. Now, that's actually lifted out of a film called The Manster, an old strange, I think late 50s or early 60s American-Japanese co-production, which again, it was the first of the horror movies about somebody growing a second head. And in some ways the special effects are pretty ropey, but in a weird sort of a way, because they're so shaky, that sort of adds to the grotesquerie and the horror of it. But as I say, in the main, films have not. I mean, I love films. I love the sort of, not merely horror films, but films in general. Recent horror films that I've very much liked. I very much liked It Follows, which I thought some people I know have had problems, particularly with the ending. The way that the characters attempt to fend off the supernatural menace, but I think the sense of it I had in that film was that, they're very intelligent, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're any more competent than we would be at dealing with the supernatural. They cobble together something they hope will work, and it doesn't. But, I don't think that's a denigration of the film.
Yeah.
Couple of very good, I suppose you have to say, found footage recent films. The Casebook of Eddie Brewer, and also The Borderlands, both of which I've just reviewed for Video Watchdog, because I do a column for them. I'm very much looking forward to The Neon Demon, because I mean I'm certainly one of the supporters of Nicholas Winding Refn, if I'm pronouncing him correctly. I mean, what I know, many people absolutely loathed Only God Forgives, but I thought it was really pretty unsettling stuff. I suppose the thing I'm looking forward to most of all, I assume it hasn't opened yet, or more correctly, aired yet in America, will be the final series of Twin Peaks, because of all the film directors now working, in fact, probably of most of the film directors of my experience, David Lynch is the only one who can actually get to me a sense of utter dread on a visceral level, in a way that is pretty well inexplicable. But half a dozen of Lynch's films I found are among the most terrifying films I've ever seen, and they remain so no matter how many times I see them.
Very much so. I know Michael's looking forward to to that series.
Yes. I'm
fan
just
of that.
crazy about David Lynch and Twin Peaks, so you're speaking my language when you talk about him.
Okay, good.
All right, well, I think that does it for us. We really thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
We are both huge fans.
It's my
of yours.
great pleasure, guys. Maybe we can do it again sometime, huh?
Oh, for sure.
Yes, please.
So, yeah, thanks.
Well, Jason and Michael,
Thank you so much.
Thank you.